Welcome back to ParaGhoul Paranormal Discoveries from the Dark, the radio show where we dive into the shadows of Saskatchewan and sometimes even across Canada to see what secrets lie within. I'm your host, KD Kulpa, and I'm a horror author and paranormal researcher based here in Regina. I'm very excited to introduce to you to another published author here in Saskatchewan who is the person behind the Sullivan Gray Paranormal Mystery series. So she writes under the pen name HP Bayne and has many books under that name in case you haven't come across them yet. So pull up a chair as we talk about paranormal, both in her fiction world that she's created, as well as any experiences that she might be willing to share with us tonight. Okay, Heather, before we get into chatting about your books and maybe even talking a little bit paranormal, could you introduce yourself a bit to let our listeners know a little bit more about you?
Okay, so my name is Heather Polischuk, but I publish under the pen name HP Bayne. I write at this point I've been publishing, oh boy, and I forgot to count how many books, but I've published paranormal mysteries and thrillers under that pen name. So I've got three separate series at this point. And prior to this, I was a reporter, a crime reporter for little over 20 years for Saskatchewan papers. So that's kind of where I got started with, I guess, my professional writing career. So that's a bit about me.
Oh, okay, yeah. I guess what kind of brought you into the paranormal mystery
Well,
genre?
yeah, it was a bit of a roundabout way, really. I'd been a crime reporter for quite a few years, and so I had also frankly, writing for way longer, like creative writing since, well, I always sort of say my mom was a school teacher, so I had actually been writing, I think, since I was like really small. Like, so I started writing like just creative stories when I was little. So I started writing crime fiction actually when I was in my late teens, but I'd been writing
Oh,
just straight crime fiction. So I was just sort of writing like these little mysteries about, amateur detectives and things like that. And I'd never really contemplated injecting any paranormal into the stuff I wrote. It was always the just sort of more standard mysteries, which is mostly what I read in my spare time. But I also grew up with this absolute fascination for the paranormal. So when I was kind of looking to start publishing some of my books, I was kind of looking for a genre that had a little bit, wasn't sort of like a big ocean, like
right,
crime
yep.
fiction is a massive, massive, massive ocean of books. And I just was looking for a niche, somewhere where I could kind of put my books out and maybe gain an audience somewhere that didn't have like a whole pile of books already in it. And one genre at that time that was selling quite well because it didn't have a lot of books in it compared to sort of your broader genres was ghost suspense. So it
Oh,
was a really hot niche when I got started, and so I thought, okay, well, I'm looking for a genre to write in, and hey, I love ghosts. Like, why not just throw some ghosts into my mysteries? And so that's what I ended up doing. I kind of just created this character who could see the ghosts of homicide victims. And so it was just a fun way for me to combine the writing I was already doing that I love doing with this sort of other area that I found so fascinating. So that's kind of how I got started with that particular genre.
oh, that's so fascinating. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
they're
so I
such
guess,
fun stories, right? I
oh,
mean,
they
they're just
are.
so much fun to write those things because I mean, you do have a lot of, there are rules within that genre, but you also have a lot of leeway and a lot of room to
Exactly.
kind of explore, ideas that maybe that you really can't do in, I think, more traditional genres,
Yeah.
which I love. I love kind of, I mean, again, like some of the info that's out there about these things, you kind of stay within that, but it's a really fascinating area, and there's just so much gray area and so much sort of room to kind of have some fun with it, I think. And you can kind of sort of create a few of your own rules too while you're
Oh,
at it,
definitely.
right? I mean, so
Yeah.
yeah, it's a neat area.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine with crime fiction, you have to be pretty good at talking about facts and then especially with homicides and things. So I imagine
Yeah.
that would be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate because I've got a long history in crime reporting that, I spent basically it was a daily existence that I was in court, so every day I'd
Yeah.
be in court. And I also have a really nice sort of stable of people that I can kind of bug for info, lots of people, like people who've worked in all sorts of different units in policing. So if I,
Oh,
if, if, yeah, there's something I need that I don't know about, say, a homicide investigation or, IDANTs, forensic IDANT unit stuff or canine stuff, or
oh,
I've got
okay.
all these different people that I can kind of really, just sort of text and annoy and
Well,
say,
that's handy.
so they've been really helpful, in making sure I get things right because I think that's important. I mean, I'm sure there's stuff that I've managed to bungle here and there. I mean, without ever having actually worked in policing, obviously, I'm still looking at it from outside,
Oh,
but
definitely, yeah.
I'm but but I do try very hard to get things right. And I think generally speaking, the people that I've been in contact with and who've, given me some help have been quite happy to try to make sure I can get things as right as possible. So that's helped. It's really helped having that background, I think, because I do have some contacts that I can kind of email or text or, messenger or whatever and just say, hey, by the way, can I ask you some questions about how this would work? So yeah, that part's been good. But I mean, yeah, definitely like you say, when you're writing a police procedural as opposed to say what I do, which is basically private investigators, kind of
Oh, yeah.
investigating something, there is a lot more procedure involved, obviously, with policing. I have a
Yeah.
little more leeway because I've got these characters who are outside of that world, kind of, sort of. So, I mean, I do have them working with police quite closely from time to time, but
Hmm.
I still have a bit of leeway because I'm not sort of throwing them, they're not directly in that world. So I can work around it a little more creatively, I think, than I would be able to otherwise, for sure.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. I guess, and what gave you the idea to use him being able to see the ghosts?
Well, I wanted a character, I think, because I was interested in exploring that whole area of uh just to throw fit into that genre, like
Yeah.
basically building ghosts um into mystery fiction. And I kind of needed a character who could kind of marry the two, right? So I needed somebody who could kind of move between those worlds. And I always, I don't know, I always found it, yeah, I just thought it would be sort of an interesting character. Like I know all the years I sat through, say, homicide cases, like watching families and how shattering that is for them um to have lost somebody like that, like so suddenly. And I have to say, like, there have been so many times, you hear from family members all the time. I mean, if they could have this one last moment with their loved one. And it's heartbreaking to watch that. And it's obviously extremely heartbreaking to go through it. But I mean, as an outsider, even I used to just come away from those quite shattered and thinking like,
Oh,
oh my
sure.
God, how awful, that is. I mean, now I think everybody's lost somebody at some point in their life. And I mean, so we all understand loss, but I mean, I think in terms of that sudden, like violent loss, it's got something extra to it. And I just I don't know. Sometimes you just find yourself sitting there thinking, geez, I wish there was a way that, that they could have that last moment. And I think that was part of what I wanted to do with the series, honestly. Like having a character like my main character, Sullivan Gray, in those books, he's a very warm, compassionate person. So he sees these spirits and he's able to sort of, his point is to try to help them cross over by getting justice for them.
Oh,
but
okay. Yep.
but I always include at the end of these books sort of this warm moment where they get to say goodbye to their loved ones and vice versa. And it's just, I think it's a way to just kind of, for me to kind of, you know, put something into fiction that I wish could happen in real life sometimes, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I think for me it was part of it. It was just creating a character that I could kind of, right all these wrongs that I would see happening. And it was just a way for me to, I think, at least if you can't provide peace for people in real life, it's sort of doing it on the page is sometimes just a way to kind of, I guess work yourself through some of that stuff.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's an ideal world really is what it is. But yeah, it's I guess that's what writing's all about, right? Sometimes. So
Yeah,
yeah.
especially fiction. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can make the
exactly.
ideal world come to life,
Oh,
at
totally.
least. So,
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
I guess where do you come up with your ideas for each of the stories?
Well, I kind of like I don't base them typically on real life stuff. Like I sort of set out, I know some authors have these fantastic books that are based on sort of actual events, and I love
Yeah.
those, but I always sort of personally felt a little bit like I don't want to feel like I'm capitalizing on anybody's story that I've
Yeah.
covered, because I feel like, yeah, I mean, there's such difficult topics, quite frankly, and difficult areas, and those stories are sort of so personal to people. And so I kind of, what I do is just kind of, I mean, once in a while you find something in the news that kind of triggers something, I think, in my, creative brain. And I've got a little, Evernote file that I keep with different story ideas. But lots of this stuff even just comes from just fun YouTube videos. Like I watch some of these paranormal YouTube channels, and I see, oh, that would be really cool. Like I had one, there was, just one clip at one point about this, ventriloquist dummy that this supposedly came to life, in the middle of the
Oh
night
yeah.
and was moving and all this. And I thought, ventriloquist dummies are really creepy. And
Yeah.
so I would, so I ended up just building a story around that whole idea of this haunted ventriloquist dummy. So just things like that. Occasionally I'll just often just find little, I'll be watching something on YouTube, and I'll think, oh, that would be a really cool kind of premise. So I'll find a way to kind of build around it, and that type of thing. And then it's just a matter of sort of combining, that kind of interesting paranormal element. Like this one I've just sent to my editor, is about a dollhouse. So again, which I kind of find creepy. Dollhouses can be a little eerie.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just combining that paranormal thing and then just finding an interesting little mystery that can coincide with that. So I mean, I like to explore themes. I tend to do this quite often. I think as journalists, I think a lot of us come with this kind of desire to right sort of social wrongs, and kind of give a voice to people who are, maybe kind of the underdog, or
Yeah.
people who are more on the fringes of society, and people who don't have a voice ordinarily. And I think so. I think I tend to have a lot of themes of, people who are kind of more on the fringes, or that. I mean, obviously people who, are looking for justice, who wouldn't get justice any other way except for these ghosts, and, Sully being able to talk to them. And so yeah, I think it's just sort of a joining, I guess, of those mystery elements with, those kind of little paranormal things I see here
Yeah.
and there. So yes, I keep my little Evernote file, and whenever I'm coming up with a new story idea, if something's not right there, I kind of just dig through there until I find a couple of things, and I figure out a way to join them, and there, then it seems to work. It's working for me so far. But yeah, with four
Yeah.
books a year, I do have to come up with a lot
Oh
of
my goodness. Yeah.
a lot of story ideas. I think it helps, because I know some people think it's a struggle, but I think for me, because having been a working journalist for so long and having to come up with story ideas every day, and usually more than one, some days was a challenge. So I think if for having to come up with a story idea every day is certainly, if I could do that, I think I could probably come up with four a year. So
Oh, yeah, I'm sure
generally,
it helps.
yes. So generally, I've not been, I don't think I have so far been in a situation where I've been struggling for ideas. So knock on wood. So I'll hopefully be able to maintain that going forward. So
Yeah. Well, it doesn't look like those ghost story shows and YouTube clips are going anywhere anytime soon. So at least you'll have
no,
lots of things to watch to get ideas
exactly.
from.
Exactly. I know. Yeah, there's all sorts of fun stuff. And I mean, there's a local stuff too, honestly. I
Yeah.
mean, and hey, let's talk about some of that, because I know the St. Louis Light was one that I used for as a sort of a premise for the one of my books, like the Edge Creek Light. I always wanted to write something based on, some of our local lore, like in this
Yep.
province. And so, yeah, the St. Louis Light was one I was sort of been fairly close to, because I've been out there quite a few times over the years. So I thought, yeah, that would be fun. I'd love to sort of base, like I made up a, background. I didn't base it on, the legend behind that light, but still, it was the premise of this
Yeah.
sort of ghostly lights and this old train track. And just kind of then coming up with a story about how did this light come to be. And yeah, it's just fun to explore some of those legends occasionally and just kind of put your own spin on it. So
Oh,
yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
yeah, we've got some pretty awesome like ghost stories in this province.
Oh, we
Yeah.
do. Yeah. I know whenever I talk to people about, haunted things, and I always say, like, you don't realize how haunted Saskatchewan really is because we've got some interesting stories here.
We do. I know.
There's
I
quite a bit
know.
that people just don't talk about.
I know. It's true. We don't sort of like I spent about a year in Scotland, living in Edinburgh, and they've got
Oh,
of course, they've got some really cool ghost stories there, and they're quite open about it. They've got this whole culture around it, and I had trained as a ghost tour guide for a little while
oh,
there while I was
wow.
there too. So in the vaults, and
Yeah.
yeah, I had a job working in a pub there with in again with sort of with a connection to the vaults, and so yeah, they had all these little ghost stories, and it was just such a it was just sort of so ingrained, I think, really, that,
Oh, yeah.
it's a different atmosphere. I mean, not that everybody there believes in ghosts, obviously. I don't want to suggest that, but it feels like it's just more built into the culture almost. And
Yep.
here it's kind of like I think it seems like everybody's got a ghost story. Like most people I know have a
Oh,
story,
yeah.
but they don't tend to always sort of be open about it. It's not something
Yep.
like you got to kind of pry out of people a little bit. And I mean, I know I did a story for the paper one year. My colleague and I did for Halloween, of course, we did this story about um, different ghost tales around Regina, which is where I
Oh,
was at
yeah.
your post. So yeah, that was so much fun. I just love that stuff. I love digging into, some of those stories, and it's fun because when you actually start to talk to these business owners or property owners about things, they do tend to open up, and they find it really fascinating, too.
Yep.
But yeah, it's a different atmosphere. You do feel like you gotta kind of, work a little bit more to get some of those stories, but sometimes,
Oh,
but
yeah. Yeah, for
um,
sure.
yeah, I don't know for whatever reason, but yeah, we do some really cool stories here, you know. So
Yeah.
it's neat to dive into those.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And I guess talking about the paranormal, what kind of brought your interest into ghosts and the paranormal?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I guess as far back as I can remember, I've always been interested in it. I mean, I remember being a little kid, and my friends were into like Sweet Valley High, and
Oh, right.
whatever,
Yep.
all these fun or little horse stories or whatever. And here I am with Dracula. Like I had, my mom. I found this book in the library at school. It was like these different books, little hardcover books with different old classic movie monsters. They'd one on
Oh, yeah.
Dracula, one on Frankenstein, the Boris Karloff version. And there was, I think, the Wolf Man and all these. Anyway, I was taking these out and I was just devouring them. I was like, this is so cool. I don't know. I've always had a weird fascination with those types of um I don't know, with that kind of world. I always sort of found the dark fascinating, and um I don't know. And I can't really sort of think where it came from other than like it's just always been built into me, I think, that I just found it interesting. And I think as I've gotten older, I mean, I'm not as into the monster stuff anymore as I was for sure, but I
Yeah.
still find ghosts fascinating. And I think for me, there's also this element of history with them, right? I mean, they're sort
Oh,
of
yeah.
this embodiment of history, and like they're right there, right? I mean, I suppose, if you're a believer in these things, which I am, I mean, having had I've had a couple experiences, and so it's made me a believer. Um, I don't know. I feel like it's sort of like you've got this element of history right there.
Hmm.
And it's just sort of, it's unfortunate, most of us, I certainly don't have any ability to communicate with them or anything like that. I know there are people who, who can, I think, and like it would be neat to be able to do that because I think it's just such a, yeah, it would just be sort of, there's that element of it. I feel like it's yeah, just being able to sort of find out more about, who they were and why they're here and all of that. I think it's yeah, I don't know. It's just there's all sorts of different elements to it I find that are fascinating now as an adult that I didn't before. But again, I don't know. I just can't think where my interest started other than it's just always been part of me, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
How about you? Have you always been same or?
Oh yeah, I always have. I always say it's because I grew up in a haunted house.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so I had a lot of experiences, and then later found out my whole family did.
Right.
Um, but but I think when I was younger, I think it was more the thrill of trying to find ghosts and trying to,
Yeah.
figure
Yeah.
out the unknown. Because I was
Yeah. Yeah.
similar. I'd read Stephen King, I'd
Mm-hmm.
read, Anne Rice and
Yeah.
watch the horror movies and all of that stuff. We love
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but now, yeah, as I've gotten older, now I'm like, well, now I want to know who they are, why they're here. What did they do while they were alive? What's the history behind them?
Yeah, I
That's
know.
more
Like,
my
why are they
fascination.
still here? I know it is
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, I think maybe part of it, as you say, with like with the haunted house thing. I mean, we grew up on our family farm, and it's been here. Our family's been here since 1910, so it's
Oh
been,
wow. Yeah.
we've got a lot of history here, so that's always been interesting. But we have a old pioneer cemetery across the road. So so now that
Oh.
you say that, I mean, that was something we used to do when we were kids. Like my brother, I used to drag my poor brother. He was absolutely, you know, terrified. Well, not terrified, but quite nervous about ghosts.
Yeah.
So the poor guy used to drag him out there all the time and sort of on these little amateur ghost hunts and the like. But, I had some cousins. If they'd come out, we'd go out there. If my friends came to visit, we'd go out. So we
Yeah.
did spend a lot of time sort of traipsing through there, and we actually have cleaned it up. Our family's cleaned it up quite a bit. I've got some family members, ancestors who are buried there,
Oh, okay.
well as quite a few other people, but we had got it all cleaned up, so it's different. But when I was a kid, it was literally this bunch of crosses in the bush. Like, it was, you had to go through this bush, and
Oh.
then there were these old stone crosses, and so yeah, there was sort of this really mysterious,
Yeah, that would be.
kind of creepy element to it back then. So yeah, I think that might be part of maybe where some of it came from.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's yeah, when you grow up in an atmosphere like that, like yours, and like mine, I think it does sort of, I mean, you either become fearful of it, or you develop a fascination for it, I think. And I mean, obviously fascination is trumps being afraid of it, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, for me, I love exploring things, I think, that are maybe, that some people find fearful. Maybe that's why I, was so interested in learning about crime and delving into crime reporting too. I mean, it's
Yeah.
probably an element of that
Oh
where,
yeah.
I don't know, I always found I wanted to understand more about the things that people were afraid of, and I think even and things that made me nervous too. I mean, when I got into crime reporting, I had a perception of quote unquote criminals that didn't stand up as I started to do the job, right? As I started to
Oh.
do the job and gain a better understanding about people and their backgrounds, that fear went away. And so I
Yeah.
think, in a sense, exploring the paranormal is the same. I think it's a way for us to explore this unknown world. Those of us who aren't, part of that world on a day-to-day basis, it's a chance to kind of explore it and understand it, and maybe confront some of our fears about the unknown. And I mean, frankly, what comes after this life, because I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of fear of death. And I think, you know, ghosts, I think, are a chance to kind of, I think, alleviate some of that fear. I mean, the idea that if we believe in ghosts, we believe that there is something beyond
Oh,
this life.
definitely. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
that's encouraging, frankly. I mean, I think for me, that's why I don't find ghosts scary. I think it's, in a sense, it's comforting,
Yeah.
to think that there are people outside of their bodies who are still with us. And I mean,
Yeah.
whether it's a ghost or a spirit or however you want to look at it, um, it's encouraging to think that we still exist beyond this body, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's, to me, I look at it as a comfort as opposed to as something to be afraid of. So yeah.
I guess before we have to wrap up, I was just
Yeah.
curious, do you want to share maybe one of your paranormal experiences if you're willing?
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to think of, I've had a few. I mean, there was all the St. Louis stuff, but to work in Prince Albert, so I used to stop in.
Oh,
So yeah, so I used to stop in there. My parents are on a farm east of Saskatoon, so I would drive kind of between their place and Prince Albert some weekends. And so um, being a bit funny that way, I would sort of stop and just kind of um, go and just stop and look at the light just on my own when I was going back, just to see what it was doing, because
yeah.
It's interesting. I always found it would do something different. I know there have
Oh,
been
really?
yeah, there have been some interesting, I think there was some university students who attempted to debunk it. And I don't know. I just I think it was some really it was a great like it was a really great study that they did. I thought it was amazing. I love when students kind of delve into that sort of thing and try to debunk it, because I think you know, it is an interesting thing to look at. But I've seen it do some things that it just doesn't seem to fit with that sort of study. Like
Yeah.
I've seen it do some interesting things. I've watched that red light kind of swaying from one,
Oh,
like you could see where the trees were. Like if you're there
yeah.
on a bright night or a full moon, you can actually see quite a bit. Like I would watch it swinging like from one um tree line to the other. Like there's trees
Yeah.
on either side of this road or old track. So I'd see that, or one time there was a blue light that I'd seen, a small blue
Oh.
light. And then another time I was there and there was the big light. I would watched it again, full moon night, you could see where the horizon was, where the end of the old track was. And I mean, it started off at the top of that. So again, you know, the idea of it
Oh.
being headlights, right?
Yeah.
Somebody, you know, that was the idea, is that maybe it's headlights.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, as the night wore on, I watched that light. It actually got bigger, and now it's below the horizon. So it's coming, you could see that it was
Ah,
coming
coming
toward
towards
me.
you. Oh, wow.
So at that point, I actually left because I thought,
Yeah.
okay, this might be a little closer than I want to be. But I mean, it wasn't, that wasn't headlights, you know, like you could see the shape of it. You could see it coming,
Yeah.
and it's below the horizon. So it's not doing what, you know, what it's supposed to be doing, I think, if
Yeah,
you're
if it was
following that
headlights
more
or whatever.
scientific approach. Yeah.
Well, I guess I should wrap up, but yeah, thank you
Okay.
again for
Well, thank
coming on. It
you.
always goes by way too fast.
It does. Well, I always love talking about this stuff. So it's great. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for inviting me on. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for joining us tonight. Don't forget, if you'd like to support the show, you can find me on most social media platforms under KDKULPA. I also have a Patreon for those that want behind the scenes information, extra content, and a chance to join a live Q&A with me each month. Thank you again to Heather. Make sure that you go and look her up. And remember, she writes under HP Bayne, and it's the Sullivan Gray Paranormal Mystery Series, although as we heard tonight, she has a couple of different variations of it, so make sure you check them out. And make sure you join us next week as we will be talking about something a little bit closer to home that you've probably heard about. And that's, have you seen Bigfoot yet? That's what we'll be talking about next week. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we'll uncover more secrets, unravel more mysteries, and delve deeper into the shadows. Until then, remember to keep your flashlight handy and digital recorders ready. This is KD Kulpa, signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.